Hey,
New
hello.
intro, Jeff.
Yeah, woke me up.
Very snazzy.
I like
We're
it.
delighted to be here with Paul Rivoche. I've been aware of Paul's work for many years, primarily through Mr. X, the
Right.
underground cartoon he illustrated with Dean Motter, but also other work that he's done, most notably his adaptation of The Forgotten Man, a 294-page examination of the Great Depression, published by HarperCollins. That must have taken a long time.
Oh, yeah.
Paul's work, I'm struck by the retro-futuristic style that he has created, like you might see in Metropolis or 1930s visions of the future.
Yep.
I think that Paul has got that style down cold, and he's had the good luck of being able to illustrate stories that call for that style. So let's start with, what are you working on now?
Well, I'm working on my commissions. I mean, I've got a bunch of commissions on the go, so that's been really like a great thing that's happened since kind of joining in with Comicsgate and meeting Ethan and making more contact with you guys. So I've had a number of people approach me about commissions, which is great. And then, of course, I've got a comic project I'm working on myself. Like most people, I've just got folders of ideas and things that have been put off. I mean, this is kind of connects to things we get into talking about, but I put them in abeyance for a long time simply because of all the usual, life stuff and factors that people know about, like had a young family, working on that, making a living, surviving. Then I was working kind of partly in the mainstream comic industry and, of course, in animation. But in all of that stuff going on, you can easily put stuff to the side. And then there's even the political factors of being somewhat sidelined and just kind of waiting, So then this crowdfunding and Comicsgate and everything has come along, which is kind of just like I don't know how to characterize it properly, but it's like this whole new door that's opened up, and it's been really great. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at now. It's kind of like I've been just reconfiguring everything I've been doing and trying to get back to like where I was years ago in terms of, hey, I've got these ideas for comics and different projects, even other kinds of projects too. It's like, well, what do I do with them? And so that's what people outside this whole sphere might not understand is, and we can get into that. So just there was no outlet. There was no apparent outlet and no network and connection before all this stuff happened.
We call it the nether zone.
Yeah.
And people have been publishing their own books for years. Most of them fade away into obscurity, but occasionally somebody grabs the brass ring. I think of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Those boys from I think they were from Vermont. Put that book out, and a marketing expert found it and cut that deal with them, and now they're both multimillionaires, and the franchise is going strong.
Yeah.
35 years after they created it.
Yeah, I've got a funny story that connects to that. Well, indirectly connects to that, because back in those days of the early 80s, I think that was around the early 80s, right, Mike? Like when that all happened, the black and white scene and all those early comics starting. So, I was back then working on this Mr. X that you mentioned and connected with Vortex Comics, which was the publisher. And this is like a funny story that I can't prove, but I think it's interesting, is that, the independent artist Chester Brown, who did Yummy Fur and then went on and did a lot of other things. So I just think this probably is the way, because I remember clearly what I did was I was in the Silver comic shop, and I knew that Vortex was looking for other black and whites to publish and other stuff. And it was when all that stuff was booming, like Mutant Turtles and all that stuff was going on. And so I remember in the lower racks, I was looking and I found this comic Yummy Fur, this guy Chester Brown. He had self-published some kind of pamphlet. And I was like, this is the wildest thing I've ever seen. It was really strange. And I remember buying it and bringing it to Bill Marks, the guy who ran Vortex Comics. And so that's my little story, is that because, Chester Brown went on and published lots more stuff through Vortex and then so on and so on. But that it kind of brings me to mind of that's the way these things happen. I don't know. I can't say I was solely responsible, But I do remember clearly bringing that to his attention because he didn't know about it otherwise. So it reminds me of like, even when we all have stories of getting into the business, like there's all these small little connections that are kind of almost mystical. Like if I hadn't done that, maybe he would have still been doing what he did, but the course of events might not have flowed the same way. So I just always find that stuff interesting. And the same thing with the Turtles guys, right? Like you're saying they kind of came out of nowhere, and who knew, right? Like now they're whatever trillionaires.
I began writing for Kitchen Sink before I broke it big with Nexus. And of course, that was an underground format. And he published a lot of great stuff. And the stuff I wrote was non-political. I contributed to a couple of titles with, I'm thinking of this great Canadian, Rand Holmes.
Oh, yeah. I've seen his work.
Did you ever meet him?
No. I think he's a West Coast guy, Vancouver or something. I think, I don't know, but I'm in Toronto, so there was a local scene here, you know.
Rand Holmes was to Wally Wood what Paul Galassi is to Jim Steranko, a guy that took that style and took it to the nth degree. Unfortunately, he died young and without the recognition he deserved, but he's an example of many of the great illustrators that live in Canada, yourself included. When you mentioned what I call the nether zone, which is the world of crowdfunding, corporate comics are dying, they're circling the drain, and it's largely through their own fault because they're not giving people what they want. A number of us have been very lucky to succeed in the world of crowdfunding, but that still probably represents only 10% of the people who crowdfund, because a lot of people are out there trying to raise money for books that don't have any appeal, and they wonder why they can't raise the money.
Yeah, and do you think it's just the books themselves, or is it because of all the political entanglement and stuff?
Don't get involved in online food fights. I derive 5 rules for myself. They're very simple. 1, no sarcasm. 2, no personal attacks. 3, be brief. 4, keep your sense of humor. And 5, and most importantly, know when to quit. But it's easier for all of us if we don't take the bait, because there's always people out there that are trying to provoke an argument. I've said this 1,000 times, but for some reason, comic books attract a disproportionately large amount of disturbed personalities.
No, that's wonderful advice. I mean, I want to get that written down, because that's kind of like you've put down what I've instinctively trying to do is just kind of go through and go forward in a positive way, but avoid all these landmines. Like I don't want to get entangled in these endless swirling dogfights, cat fights of like, it's like one of those cartoons with all the like swirling arms and legs sticking out. It's like, unless I'm personally directly involved, I don't want to get into that. And then there's all the political levels, which are so ruinous. And particularly now, like I just tweeted, I said, I rarely tweet about politics, is what I just tweeted this morning, because I felt like it. Because it's all ridiculous. I don't personally believe in it anymore. And that's another whole big conversation that may not be germane to talking about comics, but it's relevant in the sense of definitely all that stuff affected my career. And it's like what's left me in this gray zone. And I'm glad to sort of get out of it. And there's just so many angles to this stuff. And the thing about people is that everyone wants a role. So this is what I realized long ago, is that when you love something like comics, you try and find a role in it. So, and you rise to whatever level you can. And it's not always a value judgment, but, you know, some people are talented more than others, or some people develop it more than others. What I see happening here is that it's like those who can't teach, and those who can't teach Jim, like the famous. So it's like those who can't actually fully step up and be a creative professional, a writer, an artist, whatever, publish comics, whatever it is, find some other role. But within those other roles, it can be positive or negative. Like you can uplift people and help them and help the whole thing move in a positive manner. Or you can be one of these complete drama farmers. And I know there's a lot of argument about who's a drama farmer and what's drama farming and what isn't. But, you can go into the more negative sides, and that almost becomes a creative talent for a lot of people, is that they're like poking and prodding. And you can wander into this whole scene. Like, I wouldn't say I completely did, because I'm old enough to not be the complete country bumpkin. But when you first come into the thing, into town, it's like, what the fresh hell is all this stuff? It's like a Western, Mike. It's like you wander in like with the hayseed, and you're like, okay, I'm new here, kid. You know, it's like, what the hell's going on here? And who do I trust? Right? I mean, isn't it like that?
Yeah, and doesn't even have to be political. I've seen people argue over the legitimacy of this character or that character,
Yeah.
Yeah.
or a visual interpretation, and it will go on for months.
And you know what I was telling myself the other night? I almost like, maybe I'll tweet about this. For all the good it'll do, but why not? Twitter's a place to write down stuff and send it out in the electronic void. But I was thinking, these people are all really intensely invested in these arguments, and none of it exists. It's like Superman does not exist, okay? I love Superman. I love Batman.
That's right. That's right. And my favorite is who would beat whom in a fight, and
yeah, all that stuff. It's like, you know, it has a passing interest, so I'm not completely dissing it for any fans listening out there. Like, I get it. I grew up with comics. I love comics. I love all the characters. Back in the 60s, I had my little Batman play thing when I was a little kid, and the cowl and the cheapo fabric thing. And I was getting just a bit too old, so I was embarrassed to wear it. So I'd sneak home after school and go in our basement and run around being Batman. And then when I heard like my parents upstairs, I'd quickly take it off and put it in a corner of the basement, because I was like about 9. And I was like feeling like that, like, you know, I'm a little too old to be like doing this.
And then you put on a suit and come up as Bruce Wayne.
Exactly. Well, if I had thought of that, but you know, but so I get that fandom and the love and all that. But when it comes to past a certain point where you're getting really angry and invested, you're losing sleep, and you're getting into real world consequences, like all this doxing and all that stuff. It's just like, people, this is all imaginary. Like, they're just lines on paper. Like, artists drew them, writers typed them out, but it's all imaginary. So there's no Superman. There's no point arguing about who did the better costume. You can put an opinion. Like, I'm not the opinion police. I don't care. But when you get personally like right into it, like people do, that's just crazy. It is. This is like, it is.
I know it is, and every popular creative field, like movies and novel writing, has the same thing to a lesser extent, and probably less crazy. Except that I have noticed that in the movies, people who peak too soon, like child actors,
Yeah.
a lot of them spiral into the worst possible way. They become drug addicts. Many have died from overdoses. Others become murderers. There are 2 members of the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers that had nothing. They didn't know each other, these 2 actors. They were on during different times, but both committed heinous murders and are now serving life in prison, because they figure that's the way they're going to get ahead. Their attitude is, well, fuck it. If the world refuses to recognize my genius and compensate me to the level I feel I deserve, I will take what I want, and that'll be my vengeance on society.
So you're saying it like it twists them culture.
I do.
Yeah.
And somebody should do a book about him.
Yeah, no, yeah, you should. No, I mean, and there seem to be a few of these stars that are well balanced and that somehow navigate this whole world and escape it, at least reportedly.
I mean, Keanu Reeves comes to mind. He's somebody we all admire. We all enjoy his films. He's still vital. He's still producing. And he just knows how to conduct himself. You never hear him dissing anybody else. He does good works, and he doesn't advertise it.
And we need more of that. And I mean, didn't comics was always tribal. I don't speak as a fully, person who, I never fully worked in comics solely. So I kind of like nibbled around the edges, did a bunch of different things, but it seemed much more professional, and it's changed now, and it's splintered. And, I was on Katie Did's show talking about advertising and the contract. Like, I did a lot of work in the 80s, I guess more 90s, when my family was young, doing advertising. So storyboards and comps and animatics and things for Toronto, mostly Toronto, and some New York and different places, major agencies. And the contrast was just like night and day. I don't know how I segued onto this, but just in terms of the culture, I guess, if you talk about these different cultures, and now we have the 2024 like dying mainstream. We have the so-called Comicsgate, which is tarred and feathered and called names and stuff. And then we have the indie thing, which with its different factions, like the more like peripheral ones. And then you have the indie, like, well, I don't know if you call them indie, but they're published mainstream. Like you have all these like things like is it Dogman and like Captain Underpants. And so the whole thing has changed so much. And my observation was only just something going to be that working in advertising, again, like my observations about being a bit of the bumpkin wandering into the crowdfunding thing and trying to comprehend what's going on with all these different voices and arguments. It was really the same getting an observation of working in advertising and seeing that the people were extremely professional and organized and non-political, like completely non-political. Whereas in comics, increasingly through the 90s and onwards, even in mainstream comics, that became a real factor. And that's how you end up in this gray zone. Like I personally always just wanted to be a person who, like, yeah, I was probably much more so-called conservative, although I don't believe in that now. I don't believe in those left-right labels. I really don't. Because then that's another whole big conversation to explain that. But just because of that, you got increasingly in comics shunted over and then right out. Whereas in advertising, like all the years I worked, no one gave a crap. Like they'd call on a Friday and say, we need 20 frames done by Monday in full color. Here's all the briefs and the scripts. And then they give you really rough scribbles usually. And you just had this crazy weekend of no sleep and you deliver it and you feel great and you get the big paycheck. But they never once care. All they cared about was delivery. And am I right that it used to be like that in like comics back in?
It certainly was a lot less rancorous than it is these days. But this is partly decisions that the major publishers have made for themselves. Back in my day, my editors, like Denny O'Neil and Archie Goodwin, were writers first. They understood how to construct a story, and they understood the importance of entertainment, which is job one. Number one, that's their job, to entertain. And certainly Denny was a real sweetheart. And he's the guy that ushered in liberal politics into comics with his Green Lantern, Green Arrow series, when you remember with Speedy shooting up dope.
I vividly remember.
And he did articles, he did issues on racism and pollution, but they were entertaining first, and people were happy to have them. And that's why, because they didn't forget job one. If you entertain people, they'll follow you anywhere. If the story's entertaining, and there's a way to do it. Outside of comics, I always point to Kill a Mockingbird and The Grapes of Wrath as two of the greatest examples of big social issue stories with a message that are delivered in such an entertaining fashion that people read the book just for the joy of the adventure. And then when they're done, they think about what they read and they say, yeah, this guy's right. Yeah, he has a point.
Yeah. No, I'm completely on the same page. And that's what I miss in too many of these modern emanations. Like my exposure to those is more so through like the two stories is through watching the movies, The Grapes of Wrath and
To Kill a Mockingbird. I've never read the books either.
Yeah, but wonderfully done. And like one of my favorite movies is the Sand Pebbles with Steve McQueen, which I saw as a kid late night with my friend Peter. I was like a Friday night. I was like probably 16 or something. I'd go over to his house. We'd stay up super late in his living room watching whatever movies came on. And then I'd cycle home at like 3 a.m., teenager, But one night this movie comes on, The Sand Pebbles, and it just blew us away. Like it blew me away because it was entertaining and it had that Hollywood thing, and it had all the Hollywood greats like Simon Oakland and Steve McQueen, of course, and a whole bunch of others. Richard Crenna and what's the other guy? The names will come back, but just fantastic performances. But it's exactly what you were saying, is that it encapsulated, like when I look at it, studying it in terms of storytelling, shots, acting, the themes and the writing, there's just so much that they managed to pack into this one movie. Like incredible, because I tried reading the book. I got on Kindle, the book, which isn't bad, but it's incredibly long. I never got through it all. And, it was good, but it had a lot of long side digressions. The book of The Sand Pebbles. And I could see, like, if I had the time to do more of an analysis, they really streamlined it down. And I don't know how much they added that was new in the screenplay.
It's still a long movie.
Yeah, it's a long movie, but just incredible. It has an incredible build because they have some action and fighting, but it's not gratuitous. It's always for a reason, and it illuminates all the themes like racism and colonialism, imperialism with the gunboats. There's even a romance, or at least two romances, right? Because there's the interracial romance with Frenchie and this the Asian girl that he makes his wife in the story. But then there's this story of Steve McQueen, who's the sort of loner guy who just wants to be in the engine room and take care of the engine and just not get involved in politics or women or anything. And he sort of falls into this romance with this missionary girl played by a very young Candice Bergen, which is fantastic. So anyway, just what astounds me is, I guess, as a generational thing as you get older, you mention that movie to a lot of people now, they just never even heard of it. And you're like, you don't want to be the guy going, hey, you don't know about this, but look it up.
While we're on the topic of comics circling the drain, there's another reason, which is not political at all, that no one ever mentions, and that's the rise of the internet, but specifically the rise of video games, because we have a whole generation of kids here who don't read, period. They were introduced to video games at a young age, and frankly, the average corporate comic can't compete with a good video game in terms of bang for your buck. The video game, a good one like Grand Theft Auto or Call of Duty, will suck you in to the exclusion of all else so that you are totally absorbed on that game. And that's the purpose of entertainment.
Yeah. That's one I've been watching from the outside because, for good or bad, that's one thing I managed to resist. Because back when the games were rising, I remember purposely deciding, like, they had those CD-ROM games, and I purposely told myself just not to get into it because there was a professional reason to, which there still is, but I knew I would get sucked in, and I was just too busy, trying to survive. And my kids were young. It's like, I got to just keep, being the provider and make money and keep the wheel going. So keep turning the wheel. And, but yeah, I can see how they seem to be highly addictive. And, but you're saying it satisfies that need for story and involvement.
Entertaining because it's fun. Yeah. That's why people play games. But there's so many reasons for comics decline, and certainly that's one of them. I think it's the biggest reason, but another reason is that the big two have made seemingly a deliberate attempt to repulse their readers, and they're not changing direction. They're doubling down on everything. You know what I mean by that is that they forgot that their number one job is entertainment, and they hired editors with no professional experience who hire writers with no professional experience who think it's their job to deliver a message or a bumper sticker, and that's not why people read comics. They read comics to be entertained.
Yeah, it seems to be steered by this DEI stuff, but I don't know, and I'm not in a position to say what percent it's completely controlled, because that's where you stray into the territory of how much of these conspiracy, is how much of it is true or not, right? Like, I believe that that's all provably true, that there's these, what is it called, diversity, equity, and inclusion, whatever it is, DEI, the funding behind these big corporations.
That's on the run big time now. It's on the run. Yeah, colleges are getting rid of their DEI programs.
I was just going to say, Paul's right that a lot of the funding depends on that, and then checking all those boxes. So
yeah, it's a far cry from the days of Archie Goodwin and stuff. I was going to mention that I met him briefly. I have a little Archie Goodwin story, but I didn't know him. I can't say I know him, but he seemed like a great guy. Like, back in the very early 80s, I forget at what point, but I think it was even before I got involved in the Mr. X project. So I was just like starting out. And Ken Stacy, another artist here, he knew Archie, and I think he somehow connected me. But what I did is I made a trip to New York City and got in the train, and I had my big black portfolio. I was like 22, I think. And I went to New York City. And I went for all these interviews in different places, including paperback houses. And I went to see heavy metal. I'm pretty sure I saw John Workman at Heavy Metal. It's a bit foggy now. I think it was John.
You mean the magazine and not the movie? Yeah.
Yeah, the magazine. And I was trying to get work, and one of them was I stopped at and saw Archie, and he ushered me in. And I don't have a complete memory of it, but he was very kind, and he was encouraging. And I was telling him I wanted to write and draw my own stuff. And he said, "Well, why don't you come back in a couple of days?" Because I told him I was there for like 3 days. So he said, "Come back on the third day and show me something, like sketch something out." So I was completely on the hot seat because I wasn't used to doing this. And I was staying in the famous Chelsea Hotel, which Dean Motter had said, like, see, I didn't know any of the references because that's the hotel, the famous like musician, weirdo, drug rock star, Leonard Cohen, right, hotel that's referred to in New York. But he just told me, go and stay in the Chelsea Hotel. So I went there. I had no idea, but I remember going to this Chelsea Hotel, staying in there at night. I'm hearing weird like piano music drifting from like down the hall. And it was like, and so anyway, I go back there and it's like, Archie's really friendly. And I had a pad of paper and I was trying to like dream up a story that I could sell him for. I think it was, what were they doing then? Epic? I think it was Epic yeah. But and I went back and it just didn't, it was really scribbly and bad. And he was very kind. It never went anywhere. But really what I got as the takeaway from that whole thing was he just was very encouraging. And he said, you've got the beginnings. You're good. Just keep going. And for whatever reasons through the years, I didn't keep in touch with him. I probably should have. And I just didn't understand to initiate more and actually reconnect. But that was a really bracing trip because my other story from that was going to some of the big paperback houses. And there was one just brutal, like for a young artist, is where you either step up or go home, because I'm waiting in the lobby. I've told this story before to people when you got to learn to suck it up, because I'm waiting in the lobby, got my portfolio, and the guy doesn't even comes out. He's really busy, one of these big New York like paperback publishing places. And he comes out, he says, "Hi, what's your name?" And I say, "Paul Rivoche." He says, "Show me your stuff." So I open my big black portfolio and he flips through it like this, like literally just goes flip, flip. Yeah. 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 Takes like 20 seconds, closes it, shakes my hand, goes, "Thanks for coming in," and walks out. And I mean, like that's just brutal, right? Like no feedback. And they weren't all like that, but there was, because I remember going to Ace, and I think the guy there was, I don't remember the names now, but I remember going in this back room where we had his art director room, and he had some of the paintings like Jeff Jones, and maybe even a Frazetta. I can't remember, but I'm pretty sure he showed me on the wall or propped up against the wall, like some originals. But again, it's a long time ago, so it's a bit foggy, but that was like a bit encouraging. Anyway, whole point was, you go home on the train again after all this, and you're like, okay, that was like a reset. Now, do I quit? Because I'm really partly totally humiliated and demoralized, but I'm also got a new sense of the reality of this business. Like there's all these people doing this stuff. They know what they're doing. They're really good. So basically I concluded, like, you got to go home and just keep working, get work, learn, and step up your game. And, there you go. So that's where I met Archie. That's how I started talking about this whole trip.
Well, he was a great guy. Nobody ever had a bad word about Archie. Or Denny either, for that matter.
I don't know if you had more topics you were going to ask me, but I was going to show you this. I thought people would be interested because you're a writer, Mike, and I've got this rough cartoon script that Sergio Aragones did for The Spirit. I drew a Spirit story. It was like a short story in Spirit, Will Eisner's DC Spirit #3. And I thought it would prompt an interesting discussion about modes of writing. Because, you have the famous Marvel method, and then you have the other end. And contradict me if you don't agree with this, Mike, but you've got the DC not DC, but full script method. And then you've got this sort of hybrid. So like, let's see if I can. So this is like Facts to Me. And Joey Cavalieri was a great guy at DC. He gave me a lot of work. And this is from 2008. And Sergio faxed this to Joey, and then Joey faxed it to me. And it's a cover sheet. And it says, "Please tell the artist that they have carte blanche, do anything they want with the layouts, but please ask them to respect the story. Of course, Mark Evanier will end up writing the final draft." which he did. So the whole story is like these kind of cartoon layouts. And yeah, so they're by Sergio Aragones. He wrote the story and he sent over, and that was his script. So I thought it was interesting to show. I printed these out. I found them on my computer and just printed them out this morning because it's an interesting sidebar to the whole conversation of like, there's Marvel method, which is, we just talk about, as far as I understand, we just talk about it. You go off artist and construct the whole thing. And then there's full script, which I had from various people. And then this is kind of like a hybrid because he's giving me kind of beginning layouts. Like there's more, that's page 1, a splash page. And it was a whole kind of meta story, an 8-page story about a murder at a comics company, which clearly you could see was DC Comics, where a editor had been murdered, and then the Spirit and Dolan are called in to investigate about who were the culprits among various suspects. So anyway, it's really good. Like, and it gives you all the basic like poses because he's a cartoonist, like over here. And I built up from there. I didn't print out what I did with it. I could maybe I might show some of this on Twitter for fun, X-Twit. But I just thought that was interesting, like as a hybrid that doesn't get talked about as much. Like where you get, which I was used to this in advertising, I would always say to them, to avoid the trap of like they'd say on a Friday, like I said earlier, we need all these frames. I'd say, well, you got to give me at least something to start from, just to scribble even. And they'd say, well, we can't draw. You got to do it. And I'd say, well, just even stick figures. Like, I don't care if you can't, just because what it would force them to do is confront, this is a visual medium.
Exactly. Right? You were right to tell them to do that. There's different methods, as many different methods of scripting a comic as there are creators.
Yeah. And not everybody has to do the one or the other, but I don't, I'm just mentioning it all in light of when you go online sometimes, there's all these other earlier and long-standing pools of dissent, like the Stan versus Jack thing, the Marvel method versus full script, like who's responsible for what creation. And it's fascinating. There's all these like threads that are still ongoing probably to this day. I know I saw a lot of them on Facebook, and I used to wade in sometimes, but now I just
observe from afar.
Did you ever see any of Mike's scripts when he used to do that? He used to draw kind of like cartoony.
For 20 years, I wrote comics by drawing each page out by hand.
I didn't know that, so I'm preaching to the choir here.
Exactly.
Well, you know what? I can send you an example right now.
As a starting point, it means that the writer has, like I said, confronted the landscape, the fact that you've only got so much area on a page.
Yeah, and to understand the sequential nature and everything too, because sometimes
Absolutely.
They want too much.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right using the word sequential because, in the past I've gotten scripts, not too often, but you would get times where they'd be in one panel. It's like guy walks in the door, slams the door, and walks across the room, and it's like, you can't do that. And the other one is things like talking heads. Way too many talking heads.
For 20 years, I wrote comics by drawing each page out by hand. And I'm not a good artist, but I'm good enough to get my ideas across.
And I'm sure it would reveal, like it helps the story figure out the story, wouldn't it? Because you're...
Absolutely. It's an invaluable exercise for anybody who wants to create a comic. I urge them to draw each page out by hand, whether they can draw or not, for a couple of reasons. One, it teaches you how much weight a page can bear. Two, and most importantly, if you're working panel by panel like I did, it forces you to think about what happens next. And that's the most important question in fiction, because if the reader doesn't care, he's not going to turn the page. And as a result of that, I don't think there were any placeholder panels in anything I wrote. I mean, there's no wasted panels. There's not somebody says, oh, we'll just have a panel here and I'll put in some nonsense. And it also taught me to dole the words out like gold coins.
Yeah. And it keeps it a visual medium, like that whole thing of, in animation, there's this whole discussion about the fact that too many TV shows and cartoon shows and movies got taken over by the cult of writers in the wrong way, in the sense that they weren't storyboarded. Like the old Warner cartoons, that Bugs Bunny and stuff that everybody loves, those are created by artists/writers who were storyboarding them, and even the classic Disney movies. But later what happened is that you had this whole kind of arrival of all these writers who loved movies and novels and things, and they were they were writing using only words. They weren't thinking of the final incarnation of pictures. And it gets into that whole territory that Will Eisner covered in his books on sequential storytelling. Like when you've got a comic page uniquely, this is what I, as a kid, loved about it. The whole thing of weight, like a splash page or a double splash page, like in the Kirby New Gods, you'd see these amazing 2-page spreads he'd use, versus a small panel has so much impact, or a bigger one. And that's a whole metric that you don't find if the writer is not thinking visually. So that's really cool to hear that you were always doing that. I didn't know that. So
I wanted to be an artist, and I worked at it for years, but I really didn't study it professionally. I didn't take any classes. I just got books on drawing anatomy, and I asked my friends. And the upshot was that I'm very good at indicating to the artist what I want, but as for drawing finished art myself, nah.
You find what you most seek. So
I no longer do that, but refine my scripting style so that everybody's very happy with the way I write a comic, because I keep it terse and I keep it visual. I had a great teacher in college who was a television writer. He wrote for Marcus Welby, MD.
Oh, yeah.
His name was Jerry McNeely, and he said, you make them laugh a little bit, you make them cry a little bit, you scare the hell out of them, and that's entertainment. And I just thought, it can it be that simple? Well, in a way, yes, it can, if you keep that in mind, because it emphasizes the point. And the point is that the purpose of the comic is to entertain. And that means it can be funny, it can be uproarious, it can be lighthearted, or it can be dramatic as hell. Like your book about the Forgotten Man, which is based on a novel, of course.
Yeah, it's based on it's called A New History of the Great Depression. So that was a particular challenge to illustrate, simply because it was very dense with different locations and historical settings. And there was a whole other thing too. Like at the beginning, I considered like, what style should I draw this in? Because you got to consider the audience. So it wasn't a mainstream comic book audience. It would be a wider like audience out in the world that doesn't know anything about comics. So I thought, if I use a really super dark, dense with lots of black style comic book thing, that's not probably going to work for the subject matter and for the audience. So you get into all kinds of stuff like that. I ended up using a modified, what you call ligne claire, the clear line, in French, ligne claire sounds fancy, and with some blacks. And I think it worked out. But yeah, it was a massive challenge, the whole thing.
Were you doing animation after the comics or kind of during some?
Well, like I learned early on to juggle different chainsaws, so because it was necessary. Because when I moved to Toronto, I grew up in Ottawa, the government town here in Canada. It's a big place, but a lot smaller than Toronto. When I moved to Toronto, I realized, okay, so if I'm going to try and be a working professional, I got to keep working. And there wasn't really much of a comic scene. This is like being like 1979, 1980. There was barely beginning. And so what I had to learn is to kind of be a bit of a jack of all trades and be flexible. So I got to think of how to simplify the story, because like anything, it's a long story. But I ended up getting into animation and partly doing comics. Was that, sorry, tell me again your question. Was that answering your question?
Yeah, no, I was wondering, how you got into it, and if you were doing it at the same time, or if it was.
Yeah, kind of like I was kind of juggling it. But I mean, at different points in my life, due to my personal life, like getting married and having children and a house and responsibilities, because of income, frankly, which can drive you, I ended up skewing over more to animation and advertising than comics. Because my first love was comics. Like I said, when I moved to Toronto, I discovered, among other things, in the early 80s, well, if you're going to be a comic artist, probably you need to move to specifically New York or somewhere close. And then if FedEx was emerging and you could start using FedEx to deliver stuff, but basically I didn't want to put all my chips in the basket, or whatever the saying is, eggs in the basket of doing comics. I wanted to widen out and keep learning. And through a series of other circumstances, I ended up doing a lot of animation, and specifically animation backgrounds, although I did a number of animation storyboards, but less so. But back in the early days of being in Toronto, I happened, just through luck. The short form of my story is I was totally broke, starving guy. Like I guess I was 19 or 20, trying to be a freelancer. Didn't have really a foothold and connections, and it's like, what am I? There was no presence, and there was obviously no social media back then. And I was like thinking of giving up. Frankly, it was like Christmas. It was very theatrical. I've told this story before. I remember the snowflakes falling, and I go, oh, I got to do something. I got to get out of here. I'm in my basement apartment with no money. And I go, I got to go to the Silver Snail comic shop. I'll see what is going on. So I trudged through this wet snow, and I go in the shop, and I still remember the guy behind the counter said, at some point we started talking, because I went there fairly often. He said, hey, Rivo, did you hear that this company, Nelvana Animation, they're doing a science fiction feature film? And it's like, and he said, you'd be perfect for that. I heard that they're looking for people. And I made that it was like this, explode mini bomb of like, okay, that's like a lifeline. I'm drowning, and there's like a boat that's turned up, and it's dropping a little, line. So I made it my goal to get a job there. I eventually did. And I became a key background designer on this rock and roll, this feature. I did a ton of background designs for that, rapidly learned. The art director there, Frank Nissen, introduced me to Heavy Metal magazine and Mobius particularly, but other people. So it was like this whole portal. I've said to other people that it was like a magic portal, getting that one job. And it diverted me from comics, because I had intended on trying to somehow be this comics guy exclusively, but I always loved animation. I just hadn't gone to school for it or knew anybody in it. But it was like a magic portal, because the minute they gave me this job, I had money, I had connections of like new friendships and things. I was learning stuff every day, professional experience, all the pluses. And I was just euphoric for like a few days, because it was like going from complete suppression of being this like broke, unproven guy to being validated, and hey, here, come and do this. We accept you. Kind of like what's another version has been recently, this Comicsgate, and Ethan putting me on his show and stuff. It's like, I don't want to get super emo, but that made a huge difference, because even if you're talented and experienced and you have all this stuff under it's like you're only as good as your last picture, right? The Hollywood saying, you're only as like it. No one knows what I did in 1990 or 2000, like, and understandably, right? So it's like, unless somebody kind of includes you and networks you, which he did more for me in that one thing generously than all kinds of people I know, not to name names, but who could have easily been like, hey, here's this guy, like, tweet, retweet, whatever. Few people did that. And then here's Ethan, this guy. I guess I'm digressing from you asking me about comics, but here's Ethan, this guy. I want to say this because I really mean it. It's like, he didn't have to do that. It's very generous. So then I also hear people saying, this guy's evil and he's done this and he's like, and that's what I meant about trying to sort out all these like different voices that are just screaming this stuff at you. Anyway, that's my thing of like, I never exclusively did comics, mostly because I couldn't afford to. And I was on Katie Did's show, and I told the story of agonizingly having to turn down, like, Dave Gibbons was going to write a Superman miniseries. It was back when I was most intensely having, let's say, lots of expenses, and I knew that kind of commitment I would have to forego doing other stuff like advertising or animation, and but at that time, I was regularly employed by Warner Brothers doing background designs for the WB shows, which gave me a monthly steady income base. And then I also would stay up and do other like small comics things or advertising work. But then I knew if I do a whole miniseries, it's like I got to get rid of all that other stuff. I got to just exclusively focus on this and deliver it. But I also knew I couldn't do that because it's like, there's no way I had the time. And so anyway, there's a million stories in the Naked City.
Definitely look up all the different things that Paul has worked on, and all the different shows and everything. I mean, it's an amazing list. I mean, it's pretty
Thanks.
awesome, pretty impressive too. And it's funny, like I don't even know if you ever had that feeling like, oh, this is really gonna hit, this is gonna be really popular or whatever, or if you're just like, I mean, I know with a lot of people, it's just like you're just in the job and doing it and
Yeah,
into it
mostly.
and making money.
Yeah, mostly because I mean, most of them were, you're making judgments, and if you have a surplus of choices, then of course you choose. But other times you just take when you need the work, and you prioritize as a working artist um, what you need to survive. Like here's where I introduce my hero slash mentor, Alex Toth. Like I saw when I'd be on forums years ago, this is like 20 years ago, I'd see other artists sometimes criticize him and go, and even on Facebook, they'd say, this guy's like a genius and he's so great, which he was. Why is he drawing this crap Hanna-Barbera shows and model sheets and things? And you're going like, guys, it's one thing if a fan doesn't understand, even though it's not that hard to understand, but other artists, like the guy needed money. And if he wasn't the at the top of the pecking order in terms of being approved by everybody and in the in crowd, no matter how talented he was, money didn't magically just emerge and like land on his, on his desk. So obviously when they offer him a salaried job working for Hanna-Barbera, he's going to take it. So yeah, and some of my choices were kind of on the same basis, like work on all these WB shows, which was great actually. I just loved that because I had a lot of freedom. And Batman animated, Batman Beyond, Superman, Justice League, Legion of Superheroes, and it was like a steady work. And
Did you know him?
Alex Toth, yeah. I wouldn't say I knew him super well, but I would say I was a friend, a basic friend, certainly a pen pal, and kind of was informally mentored by him in the sense that I studied his work and still do to this day, but I corresponded with him by postcards. So on my channel, my YouTube channel, Rocket Fiction, I've been reading them out actually. So for anyone who likes his work and is interested, yeah, I started a series because I thought, I've got all these postcards, just stacks and letters from him. And he was very generous with his time and knowledge in writing me, and a lot of other people, not just me. So I thought, I'll just, rather than have them like fade away, I'll just read them out and put them on the internet because most of it isn't personal. Like, it's not like personal information to me that I shouldn't reveal. It's really just, it's just like having a phone conversation. We're discussing movies, his opinions on different things, trading information. I would send him things like markers and old books. Speaking of Warner Brothers, I only remembered this later, more recently, is he's the one who got me the job with Bruce Timm, because I had written him, and I remembered this when I read one of my postcards over there where I read them in my little corner and felt myself reading them. It's like, yeah, I remember now. Suddenly I had written him moaning probably about, young family, mortgage, a debt load of like paying all this stuff, right? And he said, oh, well, he wrote me back and said, Bruce Timm's starting this animated series and you should go look him up. And I think he must have written me or maybe on the telephone, given me his phone number. And I immediately phoned Bruce Timm and he said, oh, Paul Rivoche, I was going to phone you. And so it was like Alex Toth was the connector and very generous. And I always repeat these stories because he has this reputation of only being the curmudgeon that told off Steve rudely in his comic the analysis.
Are you talking about the Alex Toth letter to Steve Rude?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's famous.
Yeah. That was even circulating by photocopy in the back, like samizdat, is it samizdat? The informal political literature circulated in Eastern Europe in the underground. So I remember seeing a photocopy of that critique back in the 80s when it happened. Just someone showed me, and and all the ensuing like what's he saying and so forth. I don't know if you want to cover that or not, but
it's out there for anybody who's interested.
Yeah.
Just do a search for Alex Toth letter to Steve Rude.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with Alex was, and I did the same thing. I sent him my work and I said, please tell me what you think. And if you did that, he just let, maybe he was a little more savage. Like that's my policy too, because I've had people more recently approach me, and I'm not mean. Like, I would never be mean if someone did that, but I would be honest, because what's the point? What's the point of asking for a critique if you don't want their truth? You want someone to just shine your rear end, like. And so Alex, I think he just didn't suffer fools gladly. Like, and I knew that about him. I could sense it. I'd read his online, or not online back then, but his published critiques. So I was like, okay, should I ask him what he thinks? And you got to gulp, package up your photocopies of your drawings, send them off. And he wrote me back honest stuff, and I listened, because it's like, if you don't want to. If you don't want the honest truth from somebody that you regard as more experienced and knowing more, then what is the exercise really about? It's just a pointless thing. And I think he probably had no time for people that wanted him to just be giving him praise or whatever, like idle praise. So, but my main thing of talking about him was that he was super helpful in getting me that job at WB, and it really is a big reminder of how small things can have a big impact, either for good or for bad. So like that one little thing he might have done in passing changed my whole life for years, because I had a steady job from Toronto here, getting a paycheck from WB, doing all these designs which people still like, and I'm very proud to have done. But if he hadn't done that one little moment, it's like, oh yeah, I'll help you, right? So you're changing people's lives, and you see that in the negative with all these stupid online fights and all these the ring of people around that are all like, it's like the playground when you're a kid and they're going fight, 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 is exactly the same thing, right? They're all cheering on this negativity, and that's, I mean, it's hard to avoid, but it's not a good thing, and it amplifies in a bad way. And I'm giving an example of something good that Alex did for me when I was younger. So
it's easy for us to avoid because we understand how to avoid it. It's very simple. You don't respond.
It's Thumper, right? If you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. Bambi, the Bambi cartoon.
Are there any common mistakes that you see artists do? I'm just saying, for younger artists out there, if they want to hear.
That's good. Those are good questions. Yeah. They don't learn perspective. And they get scared off that, I would say. And that's a fundamental thing. They don't look at a wider range of influences. That's advice that Alex gave me back when I was 20 or 22. He wrote me, he said, study a wide range of subjects, son. He'd call me, it's like, and he did it himself, like he was studying, watching movies, theater, the reading plays, and God knows what, like, to get a wider range of influence, because what you'll commonly find is people have their tribe. Like, there's the indie people who love certain kinds of artists, and there's the mainstream people who, I don't know who exactly now, but they're the for the longest time, it's been the Jim Lee, Scott Williams inking style, post Barry Windsor Smith, whatever the lineage is, and they just know that, but they don't know and get and study all the great older cartoonists and storytellers that, like Alex Toth loved Roy Crane. I have a reprint book over there of Roy Crane's Buzz Sawyer. And I think in volume 3 or 4, I can't remember, they reprint a fan letter that a young Alex Toth sent to Roy Crane, enthusing correctly about his wonderful storytelling and mastery. But of course, looking at the book, I'd think, if I was a younger cartoonist, how would I regard this? And I could see how they might think, oh, it's really dated. It's like, dad jokes, dad cartoons, like it's old and it's very simple. There's no fancy hatching, right? But when you read these stories, Buzz Sawyer, you just can't stop reading them. Like, they're just incredibly well told and put together in every level. And if you have a mind to extract the knowledge and put it into whatever style you want, but the storytelling knowledge, the acting, the writing, If you could do that, which is what I would tell any younger person that approached me, I'd say, you don't have to copy the surface. Forget about surfaces. See what this artist is doing, how they're constructing the story structure, using different shots. He's very expressive, Roy Crane. But yeah, so you're asking me about things that young artists don't do. Yeah, and another main one. There's so many. They don't go to nature. So nature is the great source of all inspiration. Like all you have to do is go to your local mall and start sketching people and looking at outfits, poses, and you'll be way ahead. Then, like, there's nothing wrong at all with having your favorites. But if you want to learn quickly and really expand, that's what all these older people did. Is they did life drawing. They drew from real things with their real eyes, because you have a different depth perception when you draw something right in front of you than if you have it already pre-turned into 2 dimensions. So if you work from a screen or a photo or what have you like that, it's already been turned into shapes. So that's a different process than when you have to sit down natively and look at something, a 3-dimensional form, look around it from different angles, and then digest that into lines. And that's how you can just rapidly improve if you really grapple with that.
Where can people find you on social media?
Everything's under Rocket Fiction. So on Twitter and Facebook, I've got Instagram, and particularly on YouTube, I've been making YouTube videos under Rocket Fiction. My channel name is Rocket Fiction. So that's my unifying name.
Yeah, definitely follow Paul and check out the different. I know me personally. I'm definitely going to check out the videos of you going through the Alex Toth cards. Yeah. That would be very cool. I love stuff like that.
Yeah, there's a playlist. You just look under playlist. I've got them all separated, and I'm kind of just building my channel as I go. So yeah, but I have different playlists. There's art theory and like techniques that I talk about, and I'm going to be adding more as steadily as I can.
Thank you for sharing your insights with us.
Well, thanks for having me on, guys. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, we always have time for Canadians. So,
well, I always say to people, I'm also an American, if it matters to them. I am actually a U.S. citizen too, so I'm proud of that. So I was born there. So there you go. Thank you, guys.